Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the meeting for the special meeting for the 5th of April 2023. The meeting is being live streamed and is open to the public, and welcome to everyone in the gallery here today. I'd like to thank those of you in the room with us today and acknowledge everyone who is watching via Council social media channels. I acknowledge the Mayor, Councillor Antonio, Portfolio Leader Councillor Carl, councillors, the CEO and General Manager of Planning and Development, Dr. Stefanoff. I acknowledge the Aboriginal parties whose songlines traverse these lands we meet on today, the Western Waka Waka, Guybil and Jarowair peoples, and we pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging, for they hold the knowledge, the rich traditions and bold ambitions of Australia's first people. Item number 2, councillors, is the attendance, including apologies, leave of absence, granting leaves of absence and declarations of conflict of interest. We have one leave of absence noted, and that's Councillor Melissa Taylor and Councillor Summerfield. Now, Councillor Antonio, you are requesting a leave of absence.
Yes, not next Tuesday, the Tuesday after, I'll be involved in a ComSec delegation that's going to Canberra for that day. Delegation that's going to Canberra on that particular day, I think it's the 18th. And if I could have a leave of absence to do that, I don't think, given the issues there are in southeast Queensland and the role that I play, that I can avoid that particular trip.
Thanks, Mr Mayors. Can I have someone move the Mayor be absent on the 18th? Councillor Carol Taylor and Councillor O'Shea. All those in favour? Thank you. Item number 3 is the suspension of standing orders. Can I have someone move that we suspend standing orders? Councillor McDonald and Councillor Shine. All those in favour? It's carried. And we have item number 4, which is the development application for a development permit for reconfiguration of a lot. And Bevan is going to take us through. Be kind to Bevan, it's his first time presenting. Councillor Carl.
Madam Chair, I'd like to move the motion. Well, is it an alternate motion at this stage, or is it move a new motion when we come out of discussion? I just want to flag that.
Okay, well, I'll note that, Councillor Carl, but I think we'll move to suspend standing orders, and then when we come out, then you can, if you've got something that you'd like to move then. So we have moved suspending orders, and Bevan is going to take us through the report. Thank you, Bevan.
Good afternoon, councillors. So this development application seeks approval for reconfiguring a lot, one lot into 3 lots located at 26 Cawdor Road. I might get an attachment, attachment 4, just to show this one.
Oh, which attachment did you want, Bevan? Sorry.
Maybe,
4.
yeah,
Wendy.
4 initially.
Thank you.
Just to show aerial photography. Okay, so that's the subject site in question on the corner of Cool's Road and Cawdor Road. So this site is designated in the low density residential zone, Park Residential Precinct. I might move to attachment 6, sorry, the submitted plans. That's the first one, thank you. Yep. So the existing lot described as lot 1 on RP 142049, that's 6,412 square metres in size. So the proposed development proposes to create a total of 3 lots, each of which will be 2,018 square metres in size. This includes an area of approximately 358 square metres of land dedication for road reserve purposes. which includes a 2.5 metre wide dedication area along the frontage to Cawdor Road and a 1.5 metre wide dedication along the frontage to Cools Road. So proposed lot 1 will have a road frontage to Cools Road for a length of approximately 52.35 metres and Cawdor Road for approximately 30.3 metres. Proposed lots 2 and 3 will both have a road frontage only to Cawdor Road for a length of approximately 36.1 metres. So proposed lot 2 will accommodate the site's existing dwelling house and ancillary structures. The house's existing as well as the existing driveway access to this house to Cawdor Road. Proposed lots 1 and 3 will be vacant land, with proposed lot 1 to gain access via Cools Road and proposed lot 3 to gain access via Cawdor Road. All lots will be connected to Council's reticulated water supply, in addition to connections to telecommunication and electricity infrastructure networks with the relevant service providers. So the existing on-site wastewater system for the dwelling house and proposed lot 2 will be decommissioned to facilitate this development, with a new system to be provided within the bounds of proposed lot 2. Future development and proposed lots 1 and 3 will also be serviced by an on-site wastewater disposal system with indicative envelopes for effluent disposal shown on those plans. So for Council's assessment, the level of assessment required for this application is impact assessment, and that was triggered because the proposed development seeks to create lots by subdividing another lot, and the size of each of the lots created is not greater than the minimum lot size for the low density residential zone Park Residential Precinct, and that minimum lot size is 2,250 square metres. So Council offers assessment against the planning scheme was against the strategic framework, the Highfields, Morington and Morington West local plan code, the low density residential zone code, the reconfiguring a lot code, and the airport environment overlay code. So despite the proposed lots of the development being less than the minimum lot size of 2,250 square metres, the proposed lots of 2,018 square metres in size still achieves the precinct's required minimum frontage width of 20 metres and comfortably falls within the maximum frontage to depth ratio of 1 to 3. Further, the application has demonstrated that the proposed lots are capable of facilitating future residential development, being potentially a dwelling house and its associated on-site effluent disposal area. And this is able to be provided at a suitable scale and density that is consistent with the existing and desired low-density residential character of the Highfields low-density residential area. So during the application process, the public notification, a total of 23 submissions, properly made submissions, were received, comprised of 13 submissions opposing the development and 10 submissions supporting the development. Matters raised in the submissions received opposing the development included concerns about the suitability of the proposed lot sizes, the loss of existing vegetation and associated fauna habitat, negative impacts to road safety and efficiency, and potentially there being insufficient infrastructure to cater for the development. Council officers have reviewed these submissions and provide the following commentary with respect to these submissions for the proposed development. So the proposed development has demonstrated that lots are capable of accommodating future development of a low density scale and intensity, in keeping with the existing and desired character of the surrounding area. The applicant has demonstrated that loss of existing vegetation on site can be minimised to areas only where needed to facilitate future buildings and associated land application areas for on-site wastewater treatment and disposal. The proposed development's additional access crossovers requires for proposed lots 1 and 3, being the vacant land, can be located a sufficient distance away from the Cools Road and Cawdor Road intersection to maintain the safety and capacity of the road network. Further, land dedication, which is recommended to be provided as part of this, is along the site's frontage to both Cawdor Road and Cools Road, allowing for widening works to happen along Cools Road and future widening works to happen along Cawdor Road as a trunk road for council. The development will be connected to council's reticulated water supply, which has sufficient capacity to service the development, and is able to provide on-site wastewater treatment and disposal. So in terms of there being insufficient infrastructure, that wasn't the view of council officers either. Additionally, like I said, there was 10 submissions received supporting the development, and they included things like proposed lot sizes being suitable in their view, the development providing additional housing supply, the development providing improved streetscape appearance, and the development not adversely impacting road safety or efficiency. So, the council offers review and an assessment of this application, considers that the development has demonstrated that it will be capable of maintaining a high level of residential amenity with respect to future residential development which can occur, with matters such as potential future access, parking, and potential setbacks to property boundaries all achievable. The proposed subdivision is located in an area that's well connected to services and employment such as those in the Highfield Town Centre, is within 2 kilometres of the site. That's the town centre. And the proposal assists in addressing the issue of housing supply shortage through a more efficient use of the existing service land, with the proposal providing 2 additional lots, each capable of facilitating a future dwelling house. Additionally, as said previously, the development will gain access to the road network via Cools Road and Caudle Road, and both these roads are capable of supporting the additional traffic generated from the development. Therefore, the proposed development has been assessed with regards to the applicable assessment benchmarks, and as the application has been demonstrated to generally comply with these assessment benchmarks, and where applicable, relevant and reasonable conditions have been imposed, on balance, the application is recommended for approval.
Thanks, Bevan. Questions for the officer, Councillor Khan?
Yeah, Chair, bear with me. I've got quite a few actually, but I'll ask a couple and let anyone else if they've got some. Through you to the officer, is the minimum lot size a performance outcome or an acceptable outcome?
I'd have to double check that off.
It's in fact a performance outcome. I thought I'd just want to clarify that. And a performance outcome is really important. You know, when we assess any development, the aim is to try and achieve all the performance outcomes. Otherwise, why have them? In relation to the lot size, may I make a comment, Chair, that given the park residential, I think it is, that's the classification of this area, and the availability of other lots, as you saw on that aerial satellite photograph, and the density of vegetation on a lot of those lots, potentially we're setting a precedent here by letting a performance outcome go, and a pretty important one, that impacts on residents' degree of certainty in that area. I think that's a pretty important thing we need to consider. Can I ask the officer, the building envelopes, what does it mean by indicative only? I just want to establish how certain are we that where they're represented on that lot, what will the final impacts to the vegetation be if they're indicative only? We don't fully understand that, do we, at this point?
So the recommendation is, with respect to the building envelopes, that's provided as an indicative area where future development can occur. It's provided as an indicative area where wastewater can be treated on site. And it also provides additional details about existing vegetation, which could be retained and would be required to be removed. I suppose the recommendation that we're making is there isn't any vegetation controls to restrict anyone in that area from clearing existing trees.
No,
and while it's shown that a lot of trees can be retained, the recommendation is that we don't go as far as requiring that these trees are retained and these trees are removed.
Could we get the not that one, the other one up, please, Wendy?
Should be page 1, is it?
Attachment 6.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's on the first plan, yes.
So yeah, that's the one. To me, the reason why I want to be clear about what we're potentially approving here is if they're indicative envelopes for the building and the standalone treatment plants, then there is some subjectivity around what vegetation may or may not go, isn't there? Is there not? And there doesn't look to be a lot of green trees left in relation to the red trees that would need, or vegetation that would need to be removed to facilitate those indicative envelopes.
Yeah, so I suppose along those lines, as I said, we reviewed it, and our view is there isn't strong vegetation controls to require them to protect the trees on that site, and it doesn't. Those controls aren't in place for anyone else that lives in that residential area. So I guess the recommendation we're making is we don't go as far as saying that you have to keep these and you can remove these.
We realise that.
Yeah,
We realise that. I'm acutely aware of that, and that's why I'm pushing, along with others around the table here, for vegetation management and protection within the new planning scheme. So I did have another question here. You mentioned that the infrastructure was sufficient. I have a bit of a problem with that classification of infrastructure being sufficient to provide for these 1 into 3, when clearly we don't have suitable road infrastructure and it has to be widened. And I do have a question as to why the corridor frontage of the lots wouldn't be treated as the same as Cools at the point of application and development, considering the pending, and the application is in the system, diagonally opposite on from the T intersection from Corridor and Cools, diagonally opposite, there's in excess of 100 lots there, which all I understand will have to achieve minimum lot size.
But Councillor Carl, your question to the officer is...
Why would you classify that as sufficient infrastructure when clearly the road is not sufficient and it needs to be widened? And the second phase of that question is, why wouldn't Corridor be treated the same as Cools at this point, given the pending development diagonally across the road, or does that developer pay for the road, that intersection, to be upgraded?
Through the chair, I'll defer this question through to Michael in engineering. He's better placed to answer that.
Councillor, through you, Madam Chair. So, Corridor Road in our hierarchy is considered trunk through our planning scheme. So, the upgrade was payable by council through offset of the infrastructure charges. So, at the time of the assessment in consultation with transport planning, the determination was made that the existing pavement width was adequate to convey the traffic volumes as a result of this development, and the existing intersection arrangement was considered safe as far as traffic flow through this area. With regards to there's an existing footpath that currently is along there, so we considered the active transport arrangement is acknowledged that we already have an existing footpath on the frontage, and it's of an appropriate standard at the moment. The curb and channeling will be future works through trunk infrastructure as well. And at the time it was decided that we would take the land, so the 2.5 metre dedication, to ensure at a future date we could achieve our ultimate road outcome. But in the interim it was decided that this small piece of fragmented road, it wasn't in council's best interest to upgrade and spend the money on a small section of road, and it's more cost effective to upgrade in the larger lengths at one hit. And so in consultation with transport planning it was decided to hold off on the trunk works to be upgraded.
Thanks, Madam Chair. That'll do me for now, but it just goes to show that just because it's a brownfield development doesn't mean to say it's low-hanging fruit, because we've got upfront costs to upgrade a road to bring it up to standard, which we should, pending the work diagonally opposite the road and the significant amount of works that's happening. So it's not always appropriate for us to look at infill, brownfield as an affordable way to offer more housing I would suggest there's probably more affordable and suitable areas to provide additional housing in greenfield sites readily in Highfields.
Thanks, Councillor Carr. Councillor O'Shea?
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. My question, it's partly sort of been covered, but I'd like to hear more about it in regards to the sizes shown in the zoning that it's in. So whilst they are slightly under what is the minimum, but then also, but the widths are wider than others. But just an explanation just around the rationale of it being, as I said, just the fact that it's under those prescribed lot sizes, but as to how that fits, you know, to go ahead with an approval, I suppose.
Through the chair, so I guess going back to the start, it required impact assessment because of the minimum lot sizes, so that's a requirement it has to achieve in order to avoid going through the impact assessment process. As part of the overall lot design that's in the planning scheme, the consideration for lot design, one of the key aspects is lot size, but there is also aspects in terms of maximum frontage width to depth ratio, so you're not getting long skinny blocks, and also minimum frontage widths. So, and part of that consideration, I suppose, the outcome with this development is potentially you're not going to get those long skinny blocks. You probably don't have blocks that are as long as they would necessarily be because you're under the lot size. But our view is that in terms of the streetscape appearance of houses, it could still provide a consistent spacing with that surrounding area, because you do have those wide frontages which are generally consistent with what's found in that area. So in terms of an overall, I guess, performance outcome associated with that, that was the consideration, that could still be achieved. You could still achieve those wider lots, which present as consistent pattern with the surrounding area. And you're probably lacking a little bit on the length. I suppose that's what you're losing with the minimum lot size, largely. So we have lots that are suitably wide and not long and skinny, so there's aspects there that we can consider that you can get future design outcomes which are suitable for that site.
To answer your question, Councillor O'Shea, yeah. Thank you, Bevan. Councillor McMahon.
Thank you, Chair. I do have 3 questions. In your report, thanks for doing a great job, first time, the Highfields, Meringandan and Meringandan West local plan code was one of the assessments that this contradicted. Are you able to tell me specifically what it was in? I'm interested to know about the Highfields, Meringandan specific plan code that this actually contradicted or went against the following benchmarks in. Or should I read? I can read. So that's what I thought. It complies with the overall purpose and overall outcomes. In your report, page 7 of Board Books, Council's assessment was against the following assessment benchmarks in the Highfield. So I just want some clarification on that.
Through the chair, in terms of the hierarchy of benchmarks, I think that statement was made there in terms of we have to look at the strategic framework, and then we have to look down from that, including the local plan being next in line. So it wasn't necessarily contradicting or highlighting a contradiction there. It was, I suppose, making a statement against that higher order or higher level strategic vision. So in terms of what was addressing that, it was making a statement against the outcomes intended for that local plan area.
If I could just add through the chair, I think the against being referred to is it's not against as in contravention of it, it's just been assessed against those parameters. I don't think it's been found to be in contravention of it.
In overall,
Yeah.
it's
It's within the bounds
Okay,
of that,
cool.
yeah.
I have a question, if I could, Chair, regarding the trees. And if I could go to the submitted plans, which were up there, so we're back on attachment 6. The computerised one there, if I count the red dots, I'm up to about 34. If I go over to the hand-drawn one, the ones with red crosses through them, I'm at about 25. So is it 25 or 34, or are we somewhere in the middle for actual trees that will be removed? I'd like a distinct number with this, please, if possible. Somewhere in the middle of, or
Scroll back to the electronic one, please. So that was the most recent one. So that's probably the most accurate.
Through the chair, so the plan shown on screen is more recent. I think partially those landscape plans would have informed this plan, so the view would be that this would be the more accurate plan showing the additional trees that would be removed, and that includes the trees within the proposed road dedication areas as well.
yeah, thanks for that. We'll go indicative somewhere between 25 and 34, but some of those red dots, I would argue, are probably the largest trees on the site. My third question, if I might, Chair, sorry if I'm confusing everyone, but my third question, so if we could go, Wendy, to attachment 6.2 over again to the hand-drawn one, there's a footpath council infrastructure that runs Cools and Cawdor. This plan says that footpath is going to be eaten up by the road widening. Could you comment if that's true, and if the plan requires a new footpath to be put there?
Thank you, Michael.
Councillor, through you, Madam Chair. So I believe my recollection of this is the existing footpath on Cools Road will remain. It'll just require some localised lowering of the longitudinal vertical alignment to facilitate a safer vehicular access to Cools Road. But the actual alignment won't be relocated, and the road widening on Cools Road is a maximum 1.5 metres of pavement, so the footpath shouldn't be impacted by the road widening on Cools Road. And the footpath on Cawdor Road is an existing footpath currently.
So I'll just press that a bit further. See in probably the bottom right corner of that diagram, there's a blue arrow, proposed 2.5 metre road widening, and it goes all of the green and covers the footpath. You're saying that's not actually going to happen?
In this case, the plans that have been prepared by a landscape architect have probably assumed a road widening to occur along Cawdor Road. So at the moment there is no widening to occur. As part of the ultimate design, when we were to go through an upgrade Cawdor to its ultimate standard, with the pavement widening, it is likely we would have to relocate the Cawdor footpath closer to the north, which would go closer to the trees along that arrangement.
Sure. So, and while you're there, just on the same issue,
Yep.
the one along Cools Road, so that's not moving, but should this road be widened in the future, I would argue that would push the existing footpath closer to the house and probably remove those 6 or 8 trees along the proposed first lot.
Sorry, for a point of clarity, for Cools Road, we are widening it as part of this application.
You are widening.
We are, and the footpath won't move as a result of the widening.
Good, thank you for that.
Yep, the alteration will be we'll lower it locally just to allow for a driveway.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it. No other questions.
So just on your question, Councillor McMahon, about the trees, I'll get the planner when they come up for the applicant, representing the applicant, to make a comment on that. Good. Councillor Carol Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've just had a few people speaking to me about the treatment plant, and my understanding is, I just want to clarify this through you, to have a treatment plant, 2,000 is the 2,000 square metres is the minimum you can go down to. Is that correct? I believe that's correct. So it's big enough to have treatment plants. That's the point I'm making. Some have said to me that it isn't, but I believe it is. I think 2,000 is the minimum.
Through the chair, so they provided a wastewater disposal report, and they've demonstrated that the lots are a suitable size to accommodate that on-site wastewater.
But I do believe we, in our planning scheme, have for areas have a minimum, and I do believe that's 2,000 square metres.
Okay, did you want to make a comment, Matthew, there?
My understanding is we have lot sizes generally that relate to zones and precincts, and they are tied to those. And if they meet their minimum lot size and the infrastructure servicing required in that zone and precinct, they're considered appropriate. I don't think there's any specific thing in there that says 2,000 is the one that's appropriate. Generally, if they go below the minimum or they're not providing the infrastructure, they have to provide us demonstration that it complies.
Thank you, because in the old Shires it was 2,000, it was quite adequate, and I believe that's adequate.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Taylor. Councillor McDonald.
Thanks, Madam Chair, thank you. And some good questions come through and probably answered a few of mine, but through you, Madam Chair, to Planner Bevan. Bevan, on page 16 of the report, and it refers a little bit to attachment 6 as well, and there's more commentary, but at the bottom of that page it's talking about imposing vegetation controls. And given the lack of planning grounds to impose vegetation controls is not recommended in this instance. However, if it was considered appropriate to impose vegetation protection controls over the site, the option does exist to apply a covenant over the areas located outside of the proposed building envelopes and on-site disposal areas. So that's one element. So it's an option that is available to do. Then on page 22 of 59, one of the areas there talks about the natural environment. It says the natural environment theme recognises the connection between ecosystems, human health and what have you. And it says no mapped natural assets are identified at the subject site. Therefore, the development complies with all the strategic and specific outcomes. So I'm just wondering from a planning perspective, if a covenant was to be put over this, would that then trigger a natural assets mapping process to determine what vegetation should be kept, given that we've got a landscape plan that shows, or an indicative plan that shows proposed building envelope, proposed water treatment or waste treatment plant envelope, but yet there's been no natural assets been mapped. So I just wonder whether this is a sort of a new phase we're going through. I have to be honest with you that this is something that's pretty new for council, so it's probably a bit of working through as an organisation just to see how this actually rolls out on the ground. But I wondered how, from a planning perspective, does that trigger then an application, a further application, which would then show identified natural assets? And secondly, as this is really just a reconfiguration of a lot, 1 into 3, it's not a building application, would that then, a covenant on that, flow over to the building application, or does this get handled at that process, at the building application process? Probably two-pronged, and it's all pretty new, so there mightn't be any right or wrong answer at the moment, but I'm just wondering from a planning perspective how you would actually facilitate that.
Through the chair, Luke Jackson, our environmental officer, is probably better placed to answer all those questions.
Good afternoon, councillors. Councillor through you.
Thanks, Luke. Welcome, yeah.
Is that better? Thank you, councillor through you, chair. In terms of your point about mapped assets, it's not mapped under council's environmental significance overlay. It's also not mapped under any state protection measures. So in terms of what a natural asset might be, they're the only natural asset maps that I can find that might even relate at all to any particular site within Toowoomba Regional Council. That also includes koala habitat mapping, remnant vegetation, regional ecosystems. There's no mapping over this site. It's a mix of native and non-natives on this particular block of land that have been there for quite a while. if we were to put a vegetation covenant over this, or if it was decided that that was a reasonable and relevant condition to try and impose, then that covenant finds a balance between available area for the infrastructure required, the house, the dwelling, the driveway, and effluent disposal, fence line, and what trees could be left. That would require a survey plan to be submitted with a covenant documentation to council. Council would then become the covenantee to that, and the landowner is the covenantor. It's a mutually agreement. We've got a pretty set template around what that would be. It's a survey plan because it attaches to the title. The covenant then follows subsequent landowners. So when you get the title, you purchase it. My title includes a covenant, and within that are some words around what vegetation is supposed to be protected and why, as well as a map that would show the lot boundaries, and then the boundary of the vegetation covenant within which vegetation should be preserved.
Well, Matthew might have
That's then our normal, sorry, because one of your questions was when does that occur? That occurs in between the issuing of decision notice conditions and op works approval. So our wording of our conditions would generically include that to occur.
You were talking about assessment of the value of the vegetation. In looking at a covenant, it would be more based on an amenity issue rather than ecological issues in that circumstance, because we don't have that mapping. But there are provisions within the scheme that talk about the character and amenity of an area, and this would probably relate to that in this specific circumstance.
Thank you. Because if there was a will for this council to do that, we need to understand what the process is. And I think from what I've heard, some wording particularly around what that would look like within the conditions would be pretty important from a clarity perspective, and you've articulated it very well, I have to say. So that gives me some clarity around how it can operate in practice. And as I say, it would be, almost breaking new ground in regard to how we're doing it. So the second question, if I could continue on just very quickly, the land dedication for road reserve, I would suggest would be no different to any other where council isn't actually paying anything for that land. It's land that is provided by way of under legislation for us to use.
Councillor, through you, Madam Chair. So there's two different circumstances. So Cools Road is considered non-trunk, so the land is being dedicated, no cost to council. Caudle Road, because it's identified as a trunk infrastructure in our hierarchy, the land itself is being conditioned as trunk, so there'll be payment from council for that land as well. And that's controlled through the mechanisms in the planning scheme to identify trunk and non-trunk.
Thank you. That's very good. Appreciate it.
She done. Thank you. Councillor Von Hoff.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, planning folks. Bevan, congratulations on your first go at council. Thanks for your questions, Councillor McDonald, in regard to the vegetation. And Councillor McMahon has already picked up on some of the issues that I had questions about, namely the tree count. So I had 26 and then 34 trees to be removed, and looking at those trees that are to be removed, it is mixed vegetation, so we've got things such as cypress pines and then grey gums, tallow woods, yellow box, Tasmanian blue gums, Sydney blue gums and so forth. With the questions that Councillor McDonald was just raising, we understand, obviously, we're very aware this isn't the first time that, particularly in Highfields, trees have been a big subject for us. We are well aware of the inadequacy of current mapping that we have to work under, unfortunately. If there was either covenant work done or
I mean, the downside of the situation at the moment with that mapping is we have a list of the trees that are to be removed, but we don't have information about the fauna that's associated with the removal of those trees. Is that something then that would come up during the covenant process, or is there a different process that we would have to go through to get information about the fauna?
Ms. Luke?
Thank you, councillor, through the chair. Because there's no council overlay, our ability to ask questions about that is really limited. We can't ask that. So how is it managed? Even if council approved it today, there's still a requirement for whoever is doing work on that particular property to comply with other state legislation. And the Nature Conservation Act does deal with fauna. If through the middle of clearing it was discovered that there was a hollow and it had a possum or other native fauna that was important, then the onus would be on that developer to stop work, notify DES, Department of Environment and Science, and get a species management plan for the relocation of that animal. That is subject to state requirement, and the state has the ability to say yes or no with regard to that. But that's outside of the planning scheme process that we're allowed to ask questions around. It still applies no matter what, and no matter whether or not this is approved or whether it happens on a Sunday afternoon on a site that isn't even involved with a development application.
Kind of like at Clinton. Another question, if I look at, Wendy, would you be able to take us to attachment 4, please? And councillors, page 36 it is on board books, where we're talking about the wastewater treatment and disposal. I see the conditions that are there, but I just need to understand it a little bit more through you, Madam Chair. Yes, thank you, Wendy, for keeping that up. Okay. So we've got the specifications of that wastewater treatment and disposal that's listed under services and utilities, 48 down to 53. But I just need to understand what this actually means. So we've got this block, and the reconfiguring of it ostensibly requires this wastewater to be dealt with. Now, are we talking septic tanks? Is this the other word that we would use in common vernacular?
Treatment plants, aren't they? Yeah.
Step up from septic tank.
Okay.
But it has a septic tank attached.
Okay. So, in a planning sense, is there any problem with, when we're looking at that visual, is there any problem with having a proliferation, more generally, not just beyond this red shaded area? Is there actually any problem with having multiple effluent treatment plants across that entire section of Highfields?
Well, I guess that area currently would be categorised as having those systems already. That is outside our sewered area generally in that location. I guess there's questions of groundwater that may come into that depending on the quality of the effluent and the maintenance of systems. I'm not a qualified wastewater person, so I can't give you the ins and outs of that, but there are potentially over time issues of maintenance of those areas, decline of trenches, the maintenance of those things, and they're regulated through the Plumbing Act and dealing with those. So yes, there may well be, but that area generally is already categorised by that type of development.
Okay, so sort of tripling the number of systems wouldn't, from a planning perspective, wouldn't be an issue?
From an on-site disposal perspective, a report's been provided by hydraulic engineers, I believe, that say it's capable of dealing with that effluent on those lots in that location.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
Councillor Shine.
Thanks, Chair. Just from the point of view of drainage, I noticed that there's a requirement that an easement for drainage purposes must be given in favour of lot 3 from lots 1 and 2. It's to be 3 metres wide. I think from my reading, that's the block of land, the 3 blocks of land are on a very slight gentle slope westwards, 2% I think it says. I'm just wondering why the need for that, and also in the context of our recent changes to planning with respect to infill blocks and the need for housing, etc., that less expensive solutions might be available, like bubblies or recharging or whatever, to this complex. Has that been thought about at all, or am I correct in suggesting that it might come within that infill legislation or determination?
Councillor, through you, Madam Chair. With regards to the infill legislation, I probably can't too clearly answer that. In relation to requirement for the easement and the stormwater pipes, I guess the bottom line is it comes down to best engineering practice to avoid and mitigate any stormwater issues for the properties to the north. So the intent is the easements will remain in private ownership. They won't be owned by council. There'll be inter-allotment drainage, so a 150 stormwater pipe will run up through the easement. Then the roof water sheds, they'll be connected into this inter-allotment drainage, which will then take it back to our infrastructure within Cools Road, which gives us better ability to control any nuisance flows and actionable nuisance to adjoining landowners. The second part of that is providing bubblers when you also have on-site effluent can create problems. So when you put bubblers in close proximity to on-site effluent, what will occur when you have prolonged storm events over numerous days, the soil becomes saturated from the bubblers, and as a result your on-site effluent no longer works, and you can run the risk of the on-site effluent then contaminating the adjoining area without appropriate measures. So from an engineering point of view, the recommendation is if you have on-site effluent and we can get stormwater infrastructure to alleviate that, is the better outcome.
I suppose that's the difference between the infill development that you're thinking about in the urban area, is that they don't have on-site infill.
And my question was, really, does the infill legislation apply? Because if it does, I accept what you're saying from an engineering point of view, but if it does apply, then that may have been a more feasible and cheaper alternative.
To best to my knowledge, I don't believe it would change it. However, I could be wrong as well, so apologies.
Did you want to make a comment, Matthew?
Yeah, I think it may be more applying to multiple dwellings than subdivisional lots. And we've got the opportunity to avoid the problems up front at subdivision. You might as well take that opportunity to do it.
Councillor Carl?
Yeah, good question, Councillor Shine. I can take you for a drive and show you some legacies from the past of problems with inter-allotment drainage, from the very thing you raised in septic and treatment plants as well. In treatment plants, whilst they're the best technology today, 10 years down the track or 15 or so, that's why council is developing their own system to actually make sure these things are getting maintained, these treatment plants now, because they've been around a while. There's obviously a problem. And the proliferation of these treatment plants in this area, as the officer has suggested, let us consider mistakes from the past. We dealt with one yesterday that I can't allude to details, a massive one around septic and treatment plants from many years ago. There's another one where we had to actually convert the whole town, Kingsthorpe, because of problems with septic. Now, the next phase of that, in my view, my humble view, is treatment plants, and they're already giving problems because there's one word, maintenance. They depend on rigid maintenance regimes. I had a question regards, Madam Chair, the suggestion of covenant. At the end of the day, we are approving a subdivision here. We're not actually critically assessing indicative, and I stress the word indicative, building envelopes and treatment plant, designated pump out area for treatment plant for, I think, Class A plus water, which is designated nowadays. So my question is, can we actually enforce a covenant when it's only an agreement between council and the applicant? When the owner then of the new lot buys the lot, this is why it's indicative, and there's no protection over the vegetation, we've heard. I question, and I can take you to a place in Highfields where there were covenants, and they obviously haven't been honoured.
There's covenants and then there's covenants. Is probably the best way of putting it. There are covenants that can be between landowners and subsequent purchasers, and that's a legal agreement that can get lost in the mists of time and people don't pass them on. The covenant we're talking about here would be a covenant on title, so it doesn't have to be passed on. It is bound to the title and has certain restrictions and requirements on them that bind the landowner.
So the extent of forcing that, is there a fine, or is it, you shouldn't have done that, or?
They could be done for breach of the covenant. We have other ones like this. Wairema is an example. We've had covenants for agricultural buffers in the past, where you have certain landscaping requirements and limitations on buildings in certain areas. There's only certain things that can be used for these covenants. Vegetation is one of them that can be used, and it would be a matter of council enforcing the covenant. I think Luke's looking at me in a very meaningful way, saying that he might be able to add to this.
Yeah,
so I'll hand over to Luke.
So obviously that comes with onerous operational costs year in, year out from compliance teams, and that would obviously be on a reactive basis when someone walks past and notices a tree down, for example, which is too late.
Correct.
Yes, so that's what we need to be mindful of if we're going to entertain covenants that, in my view, are pretty subjective, regardless of title or not. There is an operational cost on compliance forever.
Yes, that is correct. Same with every other condition that we do.
Yep.
Yes.
If I could just have a question, Luke, while you're there, and I mean that was, I guess you can see that we're between the devil and the deep blue sea at the moment in terms of we want, well, I think there's a feeling that we want to have more retention of trees, and until we get the planning scheme and decide what it is that we want and what we can do and what we can't do. So in terms of just trying to get a better outcome for amenity and sort of protection of those trees, is the covenant about the only thing that we can do?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay.
Simple.
Simple. Councillor O'Shea.
Yes.
Thank you.
Sorry, my question might have a similar length answer, to be honest, because you probably answered it before. Just picking up on the point that Councillor Carl raised before around covenants and the additional, I suppose, resourcing, whatever that requires from a compliance point of view. If there's a covenant on this, that is no different to how it would enforce any other condition, whether it be fence height, whether it be like anything. Is that right? Like, I mean, is there any, just trying to understand if it's a covenant, is there anything additional?
Thank you, Councillor, through you, Chair. It is very much dependent on the wording of the conditions within an approval. And there almost needs to be a circular loop between the conditions of the approval and the covenant almost has to link itself back to it as well. So if it doesn't have that circular link between one and the other and have wording very, very similar in an approval to what would be within the covenant document, then vegetation covenants attached to a title are enforced through legal proceedings, not directly through our compliance team. So it's potential civil, yes. So it's more expensive than your standard conditions, unless we get that where myself and our property services people are trying to make that link stronger. The more we get these opportunities to do veg covenants when they're needed, which isn't as often as what people may think. But that at the moment, most of our historic covenants are basically covenants on title that would be enforced through a civil legal proceeding, not through our development compliance team. We're trying to change that because that would be cheaper on council's behalf. But it's still expensive.
Sorry. Yeah, so actually, a covenant, sounding done right and sounding like that, actually has more teeth than a condition that council...
It's a lot more visible as it transfers from one party to another, because the RAL conditions that we're deliberating now basically given to the current landowner to comply with as they're preparing their operational works approval, and then land gets sold. And there's typically no way for the RALs to be handed over from one owner to another. Whereas a covenant that's attached to a title, basically everyone has to look at their title before they purchase a plot of land, and the covenant is attached to that title. So those restrictions, by way of a covenant, transfer by default across from one landowner to another.
Yeah, so that's what I mean. So I mean, it's a lot stronger because, like we mentioned before, otherwise it's reactive around our compliance. Is it someone walking past and noticing the fence is too high or the this or that? That's what I mean. Like this, if it was to be a covenant, like we're sort of just understanding that is actually a lot stronger.
It would be stronger, very, very much so, because it is passed along.
Yeah, okay.
Otherwise, the other landowner would just not know that there was such a thing as a vegetation covenant, unless for some reason they had some planning part of their brain that went to go and look for it one day.
Can I ask, Luke, is the covenant, is it something that's negotiated between the applicant and council? Like would the applicant then sort of argue it's going to be restrictive on the type of size and of their envelope? And
most of the veg covenants we have are very much around protection of native vegetation. This one here, if it was agreed that it was needed, would centre around amenity. So you're looking at a different level of classification about what is going to help improve the amenity of the area and still allow development to reasonably occur. So how it's decided, if it was under an overlay or under state protection measures and the covenants were to align with those other measures, it's really, really simple. This one here would be a little bit more difficult to actually map out and go, is that design allowing for enough trees to be retained to then allow for a covenant to be placed around a certain perimeter?
Did you have a comment about that, Matthew? No? Okay. Councillor Bonhomme?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Through you, on this point, just to understand the practicalities of it. So what would happen today if it was the will of this council to impose a vegetation covenant on this? What happens? Is it deferred until that information is gathered and it comes back to us? How does that actually work?
We may have already prepared a draft condition if council so wanted to impose it. So you wouldn't have to defer it. You'd have to look at the draft condition we prepared and see whether it's acceptable to you to incorporate into the condition set.
The condition with the covenant that specifies a covenant?
Yes. We kind of thought you might have this discussion.
Councillor Carol Taylor?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Talking about vegetation, just looking through this group of trees, the Tasmanian blue gum's going to be taken down because it's diseased, and the camphor laurel, which is probably a good thing, and it's not in Toowoomba City, so it's a noxious weed, actually. And if you have a look over there, you know, bottlebrush, jacaranda, lemon-scented tea tree, they're not huge, big trees. So we need to, excuse me, I think that we need to be a little bit more mindful about what we're asking to be and before we consider this, because some of these trees are large and worth keeping, and some of them, like a bottlebrush tree, you know, they only have a life of a certain amount of time anyway, probably 15 15 years or something like that, and the same with the lemon-scented tea tree. They droughts and wet times affect those, along with the liquid amber, because it's not a really tall tree either. So I think that we need to, if you were looking at any sort of thing like that, you would need to be very mindful that the tree needs to be worth saving before you start to think about putting those in there.
Thank you, Matthew.
Yes, we would definitely have to have those considerations and discussions with the applicant about what the terms of the covenant would be saying. You know, you might be saying that certain trees over certain diameters within an area would be protected or something like that. There would be terms about maintenance, replanting, removal, all those sort of things built into it.
Because actually, bottle brush and that, unless they're just that one particular type of Viminalis, they're not trees, they're actually shrubs. So, there's just, there's a bit of a mix-up, and I've driven past and there's a bit of a mix-up along the front as well, so.
Councillor Carl?
Through you, Chair, to anyone's suitable officer to answer. Would it be a fair assumption to say that if we were to go down the path of a covenant, and I say again rather subjective because it is reactive, the only time you enact the covenant is when something's happened and it's too late. But the question, would it be a reasonable assumption to think, now this is a 1 into 3, if you look at that satellite image there, across this large, really low density area of the first parts of Highfields from many years ago, would it be a reasonable assumption to think that we could be possibly managing multiple covenants across many different blocks? And what would that look like operationally or legally if it was enacted over a title? I'd suggest do you reckon we'd have some more litigation backed up on our files to deal with? That'd be a fair assumption, wouldn't it, Matthew?
We'd have to see what the mix of lot sizes through that area are. I guess if we just look at on a basic level at what we've got there, there's not many blocks that are the same size as this. There's a lot of them that are quite deep compared to their frontage. We wouldn't support the battle axe blocks under our current provisions in the planning scheme, so that limits to a certain extent some of those larger, deeper blocks from being subdivided. There may be some opportunity for subdivision into those areas. It also might depend on what extent of vegetation might be there and whether it's worth keeping as well.
Well, that's why
it'd be hard to judge the extent of it, I guess.
Well, that's why I'm raising, if we're going to set a precedent with a covenant and also set a precedent with undersized lots, which is a performance outcome, it doesn't meet that, then we probably need to be prepared for that precedent to set the benchmark for potential future subdivision right through this area. By the way, that there cools up to Sunray and way beyond, right up the other side. That's a small part that is susceptible to this sort of infill if we are going to lower the benchmark of 22,250 to 20,018, which is a difference of 232 square metres, which is 20 by 20, which is a suitable transpiration designated pump out under a normal lot size of 2250, the minimum lot size for this area.
Councillor Carl, are we debating or are you asking a question?
Yeah. So it would be a reasonable assumption, wouldn't it, that we could possibly, if we set the precedent here with a covenant for vegetation, because there's more heavily vegetated areas right through this park residential area of Highfields, we could end up trying to manage multiple separate covenants if we choose to go down this way.
That is a possibility. I don't know to what extent, but...
No, neither do. That's why I'm asking. It's potentially a risk.
Well, I think in the words of Councillor Tate, the last chair of Planning and Development, it's a hypothetical, isn't it? It's a hypothetical.
No, it's a reality. We've got an infill lot subdivision right here, right now.
Okay.
That is outside of the town planning guidelines.
Are there any further questions for the officer? Now we have one person who is a submitter, Judith Akins. Would you like to come and speak, or would you like to reserve your right to speak, Judith? You'll have 5 minutes to, if you'd like to.
I think listening to the questions and the comments that have been made, I don't think the trees are an issue. I don't think the development's going to cause any problems. I'm quite happy to see that it would proceed.
Okay, thank you, Judith. And we have James Williams, who is from Precinct, who's presenting for the, you're going to come up and speak, James. 5 minutes thereabouts, and then you'll get some questions, no doubt. Hopefully you've been making some notes about some of the concerns from the councillors. Thank you, James.
Lots of questions.
Sure, thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and councillors. Thank you for providing us with the opportunity to speak on behalf of our client today in support of this application. So there's obviously a number of questions raised by the councillors previously, which I agree with most of council's responses there, and I'd just like to elaborate on some of those. With regards to the minimum lot size, so the minimum lot size is an acceptable outcome. So it's acceptable outcome 4.1 of the reconfiguring a lot code. The performance outcome associated with that just identifies that all lots provide sufficient area, frontage and dimensions and road access which enables the future development, which we've demonstrated in that site plan shown before. Would we be able to go to the landscape plan, the hand-drawn one, please?
Now, James, we were a bit confused which was the latest.
Yes, so the digital one that was the first plan, that's shown every single tree, plant, absolutely everything on the site. Some of the trees and plants that are shown are sort of finger thick. It's very, very small. What we did with the landscape plan there was we got Evan, our landscape consultant, to go onto the site, identify what trees are actually of significance to the site, and that's what he has mapped there. So you'll notice that there's four trees on the lot 3 there that are impacted by the potential building envelope. There's also a further 3 trees on lot 1 on the corner there, which are impacted. So those are the seven trees that could potentially be cleared as a result of the development. With the on-site effluent disposal areas, so, and it sort of touches on stuff that Carol brought up earlier. So with on-site effluent disposal systems, these days you can get them on very, very small lots. Like you can get them on lots down to say 800 square metres or so if you design it appropriately. So what we've done on this site actually here is we've proposed an effluent area of about 350 square metres. So this effluent area is approximately double the size of what we would actually need to provide the system that the client is looking at providing. The point of providing that area is to allow for irrigation around the existing vegetation. So we're not looking at clearing any of the vegetation within that area. It's just we've provided a bigger area to ensure that the nutrients of the soil, all that sort of stuff, are not impacted, which doesn't adversely impact on the trees. The identified tree clearing is predominantly a worst case scenario, essentially. So with Councillor Cahill's comment there about the indicative building envelope, so council asked us to provide indicative envelopes which would show the potential clearing of trees within the site to get an idea of how many trees could be impacted. The building envelopes are not necessarily exactly where they will be. The client will look at trying to avoid clearing. He is wanting to live on one of the sites there, so he is wanting to try and keep as many trees as possible. With that as well, we've identified a building envelope of 600 square metres, which again is the worst case scenario. Typically your house, a standard dwelling house would be about 200 square metres, maybe up to about 300 300 square metres, which is half the size of those areas there. With regards to the road upgrades, so I believe Michael addressed those quite well before. So we have tried to use existing crossovers there to Corridor Road, and the design shown on this plan here isn't actually the road widening. It's actually just the road dedication. So there's just the wording on that is different to what's proposed there. So again, the footpath, all that will be retained. There are engineering designs that were provided for Cools Road there, which confirm that the footpath and everything will stay on Cools Road, and we can adequately provide driveways, all that sort of stuff. With regards to the stormwater easements, so so our civil engineers, Brandon and Associates, have done up a stormwater management plan, which have identified a number of potential stormwater options. The option which council has chosen to go with was probably our least preferred option out of all of it. Our preferred option was we demonstrated that we could discharge 2 bubblers within the site, which would then discharge to the street during significant stormwater events. So that would be our preferred option. However, we've identified a number of options that could potentially suit that situation. Back on the tree clearing. Sorry. So with a number of the trees there, it was identified there that there's a couple of trees like the camphor laurel and everything, which is being cleared, and they're weeds. There's also a number of trees on the site at the moment which are infected with white ants, which the client would be looking at getting rid of to stop that infestation, to ensure it doesn't impact on anything else on the site, buildings, trees, all that sort of stuff. Yes, I think that's all my
That's great,
points.
James, because we've run out of time. So I might ask the councillors if they have any questions for James. Councillor McDonald, Councillor O'Shea, and then Councillor Bonhoff.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thank you, James, very much indeed. In regard to the covenant, has this been spoken about with your client in regard to what that might look like, or understanding today the process, what that might look like for you?
No, we have not. Council has not discussed the imposition of a covenant with us.
Is that the end of your questioning there?
Do you have an opinion on it?
We would have to get legal advice pending a decision to determine what the legality of imposition of the covenant.
Councillor O'Shea?
I had the same question, so I'll change it to can you just talk us through, you talked about what your preferred option of discharge was and why?
Yeah, so we, to essentially mitigate the risks that the council has brought up before about inter-allotment drainage, we proposed bubbler solutions which discharged internally to the site. The stormwater report prepared by Brandon's did consider impacts on that discharge through impervious areas, the on-site effluent disposal, all that sort of stuff, and determined that it was an appropriate solution that complied with the Queensland Urban Design Manual.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Bonhoff?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, James. And thanks to Evan for his work with this image that's up before us. Can I just go back to your tree count? I think you said there were 7 trees to be removed?
7 trees that would be impacted by the building envelope. There would be no trees cleared within the on-site effluent. We don't need to, unless there was conditions by council with the plumbing approval. That's just a worst case scenario. The majority of trees that are being cleared is as a result of council requiring land dedication along Corridor, and I think there's 1 tree along Cools Road there that would be impacted. Council's Parks Department have decided that they don't want those trees to be retained.
Okay, so looking at this, I want to kind of ask a few more questions about something that you've just said there. So we've got at the back of the blocks, I suppose, the top of the screen, the proposed effluent dispersal envelopes. And you're right about what we've got in front of us is a list of vegetation. Some of it is the liquid ambers, some of it is the jacaranda, and so. But those three back sections on lot 1 and lot 3, we see Evan has marked EB 1, 2, 3 times, and EB is the grey gum. Those are, so 1, 2, 3 grey gums to be removed.
So, as I was saying before, in the on-site F1 area, we would be avoiding clearing any of the trees in there. With the on-site irrigation, you can actually irrigate around the trees. We do this a lot in koala habitat areas, all that sort of stuff. So we've just identified an area there that the maximum area that may be required for on-site effluent to confirm that it fits within the site, but we would be looking at retaining those trees.
Okay, it's important that I get to the bottom of this. I had a bit of a reaction when I mentioned that from council officers. Why is that?
Sorry, why is what?
There was a reaction when I mentioned the grey gums being removed from those effluent dispersal envelopes.
That may be an aspiration, but the plans we've got show them being removed. So I guess we assumed they were going to be removed.
Yeah, well, that's just a worst case scenario. We wanted to identify the maximum impact that the development could potentially have on the site, but we have no intention to remove those trees at this stage.
I mean, it's an important point because they're huge old gum trees. So we've got council officers saying that they've been identified for removal, big old grey gums, and I'm confused and seeking clarity, Madam Chair, because, James, you're saying that they won't be removed.
Well, as I've said, that plan there is showing a worst case scenario in the event that those trees needed to be cleared under any plumbing approvals issued by council. The ones on lot 1 in particular, I think it's lot 1 on the corner, isn't it? Yeah, the ones on lot 1 there, the applicant is actually wanting to live on the site and is intentionally seeking to retain those trees in that area, but it is just a worst case scenario.
Okay, Madam Chair, can I seek clarity from officers then, because for councillors to make their decision on this matter, we have two scenarios being presented. A worst case scenario, we're being told, and then that they are slated for removal. Can we get some clarity on which would occur?
I guess we go back to the sort of standard answer we've given. At this point in time, there are no controls to stop any of them being removed.
Except if there was a covenant.
Depending on the terms of the covenant and the location of the covenant, potentially, yes.
Councillor Carl? Oh, sorry.
Madam Chair, it's probably feasible I drive past that corner every day, and it's probably feasible to realise, irregardless of whether they need to go for a effluent disposal or not. If it were me, I probably wouldn't build a house under some of those big trees, so they're likely to go from that point of view, regardless of effluent disposal, pump out area and root infestation of that area and all that sort of stuff. So it's highly likely, when you know the site and see the site, those significant trees hanging over a house is probably not the best investment to make, building a house on those size envelopes in this type of area. So I would tend to agree with the officers if that's the information you've been provided, the formal, particularly the other one, the updated one as it was referred to. That's what we've got to go on.
Just to reiterate again, that those plans there show a worst case scenario. The on-site, the building envelope, there are about 600, 650 or so square metres. A house itself is only going to be about 200, maybe 300 square metres, which is half that area, and can easily be located outside the canopies of trees.
Any further questions, Councillor McDonald? I beg your pardon, sorry, Councillor McDonald, I skipped Councillor Taylor before.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to ask a question through you. Do you know, you spoke about white ants and stuff, and I mean, we've heard that one of the big trees is diseased and it's going to be taken down, as well as the camphor laurel, which nobody should be worried about. It's not in Toowoomba, so it's a noxious weed. But do you know what trees are infested with white ants? And I'm sure that all of us would want to get rid of it if they were on our place. Do you know which ones?
They're the black butts.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, they're very prone to white ants. Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, just on that okay. The report says something different to that, or the arborist report says something different to that. It actually says that it's the Tasmanian blue gum suggested for removal due to ill health.
Councillor McDonald, you had a question?
I did, yeah, thank you. Thanks through you, Madam Chair. Perhaps to GM Nicola, actually. Just in regard to the covenant, James, thank you for your answer in regard to you would have to look into this legal wise. This is breaking new ground for us as a council, and I wondered just if you had an opinion, or you could make an opinion on. We've gone through the process of what we believe we should do, but the legal grounds on which we have to enforce a covenant on a private piece of land where the owner has the right under the current planning scheme to do with what they want with that land under the zone and precinct in which they have that land.
Thank you, Councillor, for the question, and I'll speak on a general basis. So it's not uncommon to attach conditions to land, for example, things like easements or building parcels here. So obviously this is the largest size building parcel. So essentially that creates a covenant of sorts in that specifies where you can build, where you can put a septic system. So the council officers have recommended this for approval. If vegetation is of interest to councillors, clearly the applicant is also very interested in retaining that vegetation. So if council took that step of seeking a covenant on that property, it would be a significant step. So it's not something that this council has done before, I think, in this type of circumstance. But it might be consistent with a council's position moving forward in terms of protecting vegetation for amenity, those types of things. It is significant if you are imposing a limit or fettering the rights of a landowner. So it would be something that council should take very seriously. And then in that instance, you would also think about why you are doing it. Is it for amenity? Is it to protect particular types of trees, etc.? Which is why it's not included as a necessary condition recommended by council officers. So no, I agree. It would set a precedent for this council. The legalities, I don't think, have been fully considered, obviously, because it wasn't part of the recommendation of council officers. But if it was for councillors, a decision between not approving this application because of concerns about vegetation, or possibly approving it with some a covenant in terms of vegetation, then that is sort of open to council to consider.
Did that you finish, Councillor McDonald?
Yeah, I appreciate the fact that this is new for us to do, right? And a legal opinion of what we're doing would be beneficial before we were to make a decision of going down that path. And whether that's internal or external would be something that I'd be seeking officers' feedback in regard to that. But I've got enough information to actually make a decision on today's application, and therefore I'm happy with the agreement of the majority to move out of this session and continue with standing orders.
Would I be able to expand on Nicola's answer?
James, go for
Yeah.
it.
So in our respect, any conditions relating to covenants or anything would have to be deemed as reasonable and relevant. Our position is that given there's no identified native remnant vegetation on the site, or koala habitat is not identified under Council's environmental significance overlay, that we don't believe that a condition would be reasonable or relevant in that regard. I guess generally with covenants, it would generally relate to larger sites where you're trying to protect big parcels of vegetation to stop development occurring in there. In this case here, given that there's the on-site effluent areas, the building footprints, all that sort of stuff, it would be more strenuous to impose a condition such as that. Sorry, just one more point too. I would also like to just confirm that there is no precedence under the Planning Act. So if no matter what decision is made here today, there is no precedence for another application in that respect.
Thank you, James. Councillor Carol Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't think it's fair for us to be sitting here on the spur of the moment putting some sort of a covenant over something when we don't even know what the legality of that is. And I go back to what are we trying to protect here? But at the end of the day, this map is very confusing in that we've already heard that those black butts are going to be taken down and they've got a green dot on them. And then another point I'd point out that you've made before, and I'm sorry, I can't remember. James, I thought it was James, sorry. If you have a look at the footprint of Lot 2, how small that is, as the point James is trying to make, with these others, there's actually plenty of room to put a house and their surrounds on it without having to impact those lists. But I would like to go back to the black butt that we are being told that are being taken down because they've infested with white ants. So that EP, that is 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So, and you can't say that you'd want to retain something that's diseased, but that's the fact. Is it through you, Madam Chair, that those 3 trees will be going?
Only 2 of them are infected with white ants.
I thought you said they were infected with white ants.
Yeah, two of the 3 are the ones.
I'm so sorry. Yep. I'm sorry. Thank you very much. 2 of the 3. Do you know? Can you point out to us which ones?
I'll get the applicant to do that if that's okay.
That's fine. And the other thing, I don't agree with the covenant. If we can manage to work around that, I think it's an unfair. We need to think about the fairness and the relevance of that as we sit here making a decision on someone who wants to do something with their land that they own. Thank you.
The next is the applicant.
Sorry, it's just identifying those trees.
I just get the General Manager, Nicola, to make a comment. Thank you.
Can we just wait and see? Is it the one up right on the back?
See where it says Lot 2 existing residence?
Yes.
It's the one directly to the right of it, and the one directly to the back of it.
Okay.
So that existing residence is the house that's
So
already
it's
there.
not those 2 on Lot 3?
No.
No, thank you very much. That's clarified. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And just for further clarity as well, so the council officer's recommendation does not include that the covenant be applied. So when we present alternatives, there's a range of alternatives we might present, but ultimately the council officer's recommendation is as it stands, and that does not include the covenant.
Councillor Von Hoff.
Yeah, one more question, if I might, Madam Chair, through you. James, when you were saying before, I didn't quite catch it, you were talking about you've had experience with other developments where you've had similar effluent disposal systems, and they are such that the root system doesn't affect them and it allows the trees to stay in place?
Yes, that is correct, yes.
Okay, so then in that lot 3, for instance, or lot 1, I guess, we've got the envelope, but to actually put the system in, you can retain those trees potentially. You can retain those trees and excavate to put the system in. Is that correct?
Yes, so the system itself, the actual septic tank, would likely go near the house, and up around those trees would just be an irrigation area.
Right.
No, they wouldn't be the pits. They'd be irrigation, like your normal lawn, like your pop-up sprinklers.
Right.
Yeah. Another option is too, with those irrigation areas, you can also have taps in the ground, which you just plug a hose in and walk a sprinkler around. There, so there's a few options to be able to achieve that.
Okay, and I think you also mentioned before, it's the owner's intention and desire, because to live potentially on lot 1, and it is their intention and desire to retain as many of those grey gums as possible.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, they would be. He'd be looking at retaining as much as he possibly can on that site.
Okay, thank you.
One more question.
No, not a question. Just happy to move to go restore standing orders.
Are you rushing things along, are you?
No, well, I think we're pretty
Has
well
everyone
exhausted,
finished
I
their
would have thought.
questioning?
Have you got more questions?
No. Okay. So Councillor McDonald has moved to reinstate standing orders. Can I have a seconder? Councillor McMahon. All those in favour? Okay. Thank you, James. Thank you very much. Okay. So the recommendation is there before you that council approve application.
Madam Chair, I'd like to move an alternate motion and as submitted to councillors yesterday.
I think Wendy's got a copy of that.
I'll give it up.
Are we right with the timing there, Wendy, in terms of coming out? Are we okay with that? Yep.
No, that's just trails and they don't expect yeah.
That's it there. So, Councillor Carl, did you want to read out your alternate recommendation?
Yep. And Wendy, are you able to put the item numbers below that so councillors can see? Or councillors have it anyway, but...
We all received that on an email yesterday from you. Thank you, Councillor Carl.
I can read it out if you wish, Madam Chair, that council refuse application number RAL 2021/7542 for a development application for a development permit on reconfiguring one lot into 3 pursuant to the provisions of Section 60 of the Planning Act. This application is refused on the basis that the proposed development does not comply with the following benchmarks on the balance. The positive aspects and benefits of the development have not been found to outweigh inconsistencies with the planning scheme and adverse impacts as outlined below. I won't read all of it, just to say that it proposes to create lots of a size that are inappropriate to the locality, to this area, and they're way undersized for this area. The development creates...
Councillor Carl, I might get you to speak to it. I have a seconder for Councillor Carl's alternate motion. Councillor McMahon. We go into debate. Do you want to speak to it, Councillor Carl?
So, just a point of clarification. The information I was provided by the officer, Matthew, performance outcome. The applicant's representative said that it was an acceptable outcome. Can I get clarity on that, please? Because that's the information I was provided.
I've I thought it was an acceptable outcome.
Well,
But
it's-
you're talking about the overall outcomes within the design.
9.4.5.3, table 9.4.5.2, performance outcome. Proposed development does not create lots greater than minimum lot size of 2250.
Could you scroll up a little bit, please?
Says performance outcome there. I can only go on what's given.
Yeah, it does say performance outcome there.
However,
It's various things in different codes. In the residential the low density residential code, it's a performance and overall outcome. And in the reconfig code, it's a performance outcome.
Yes.
Looks like this.
So I still stand by what I say, that it's a benchmark. We have a planning scheme that has performance outcomes. We stand to set a precedence if we're under by some 232 square metres, which is roughly about, what, 20 by 20? That's a fair area. So we potentially set precedence for this area. The other thing with the discussion, and I am the first to acknowledge the importance of vegetation remaining, but we don't have any levers to pull there. But we do, because it's undersized, the lots, despite the frontage width. The notion in the report of 400 metres of similar sized lots, 400 metres away, if you care to take a drive to that area that I think the office is pointing to, after probably the best part of 20 years, the trees wouldn't be a third of the size of the existing vegetation on these lots. And they're not native. They're planted by residents who move in on lots that are larger than these lots. The report also spoke about choice Yes, I am. Are you right, Councillor Dunn? Okay. So the officers' report also spoke about living choice or housing choice. We actually do have choice by keeping this area intact. What we're doing is eroding it away to make it more common with the sizes of lots, particularly to the west of Cools Road and beyond, and then they go down in even smaller into Seward lots. So we're actually eroding away a living choice and the fabric of this community by allowing infill into this area with grossly undersized lots, and it affects the amenity of Highfields overall, potentially. If we think that this will stop at one lot, then I think we're kidding ourselves. And I say, and it's not on, I acknowledge on planning grounds, and this is where I have great problems with planning, because we get to fix up mistakes from the past, and I alluded to those ones in Kingsthorpe, and there's an area in town that we were talking about here. There's numbers of areas in the city, or another area in the city, where mistakes of the past, where it's been allowed to develop, and we've actually had to come back and fix things, retrofit. So we've got potentially the first wave of vegetation that gets removed with infill, and then down the track, and I recall my days on Crow's Nest Council, where local governments were instructed, that's why it went to small lots, to get away from treatment plants and septic systems with the potential to affect groundwater. I vividly remember that. In actual fact, it was the reason why I ended up on council. So here we are, some 20 years later, I might add, still deliberating on how we can carve up lots and let non-sewered lots go into these areas. I think it's really sad. I implore councillors to think about just what we're creating, the legacy we're potentially leaving. On planning grounds, they're undersized lots. So refuse it. They're undersized lots. Because the next neighbour along, or the one around the corner, or the one up on the northern side, the lots up on the northern side of Highfields Road, there's some large lots up there. They could all argue precedence for undersized lots and being subdivided too. And it'll come at a great cost in retrofitting sewerage when these systems fail in the next 10 to 15 years because of lack of maintenance. And I stress again, council is initiating a system to look at compliance for maintenance of these treatment plants, let alone the septic. Anyway,
Thanks,
thanks, Chair.
Thank you. The speaker against the alternate motion? Well, I'll put the motion. Do you want to sum up, Councillor Carl?
I'm really sorry to butt in. I've gone out on a limb and seconded this, and I was really hoping.
I'm sorry, Councillor McMahon.
Yeah, I was wondering
there's
if you might
no speaker
break
against.
protocol to let me explain
No, I think
why
we've
I
had
did.
enough discussion. We've got enough discussion this afternoon. So, Councillor Carl,
Hang on,
do you want to sum
point
up?
of order, sorry. Do you mind repeating that comment, Councillor Carl? I took offence to that.
I surely can, Councillor James.
Sorry, I say that respectfully, but yeah, I'm
I surely
concerned
can.
by those.
I suspect after my courteous email to councillors well ahead of time of this meeting, there's most likely been some discussion and deliberation about the matter. I could be wrong, but I've been around the table for a while and experienced that before, so I can only assume I might be wrong. And if I am, I apologise.
Madam Chair, can I make a comment, please? I have not discussed this with anybody around this table.
Well, I think
I'm actually put at this table to make a decision on how I see this, and I take offence at that as well. I mean, we've made decisions here in the recent weeks about things that don't fit with the town plan, and yet people vote for them, and we need to, you know, I'm having trouble understanding the inconsistencies with some people's thoughts on things, but I have not caucused with anyone.
Point of order, I just want to say just one thing. Councillor Carl, I appreciate the answer. I just genuinely felt I needed to understand that because probably Sim, I don't know.
No. Well, it's just, yeah.
So, Madam Chair, if I'm wrong, I apologise.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Carl. So, take this opportunity to sum up. Do you have anything further to say?
Well, Councillor Tim's busting to talk. Can he sum up on my behalf?
No. Okay, we'll put the motion. The alternative motion is that council refuse the application for lot 1 into 3, RAL 2021 7542. All those in favour of the alternative recommendation? That's 3. All those against? It's 2, 4, 5, 6 against.
Can I have a division of the vote, please, Madam Chair?
So, the vote's lost. Do I have someone move the original or the officer's recommendation? Councillor McDonald, seconded Councillor Carol Taylor. All those in favour? All those against? Motion's carried.
And a division again, thanks,
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Same. Thanks, everyone.